On this week's Back of the Grid, we've got cars on track, so we'll do a quick roundup of testing, and we've got a few rule changes for the new season as well. Hello everyone, welcome to Back of the Grid. I am Chris, joined as ever by Tom.
Hello.
And the season's sort of started. I think I count testing as the beginning of cars are on track.
I'd say that's the start of the season. Like you say, cars are on track. We've seen cars doing laps.
Yeah.
3 days worth.
So it's time to dig into every minute detail of it because testing tells us everything that we need to know about the coming season. He obviously doesn't.
I think this year he's told us what we kind of already knew, which is the order's not going to shuffle around that much, especially at the top end of the grid.
Yeah, I think we can definitely glean a loose order from it. We can pick out who's looking good and who's in a bit of trouble. So we'll have a rough run through of how testing went for various teams, and sort of go from there. So, sort of as everyone expected, McLaren seemed to have started this year as they ended last year. They seem to be fastest on quali and race pace. Fairly small margins. I saw one analysis of like race simulations, and I think it was Piastri and Russell were doing similar race simulations at a similar time. Yeah. And on the softer tyre, the McLaren had maybe a 0.3 advantage. On the harder tyres, it was much, much closer between the two of them. So it's a very small margin, but McLaren do seem to be the team to beat as things currently
There was an
stand.
interesting mini race simulation that I think Norris, honestly it was Norris, Leclerc and Russell were doing. Like sort of three of the top teams were involved, and there was an interesting stint in the middle where Norris had gone to one of the harder tyres but was still faster than the others running the medium, and then when that then flipped the other way and Norris was on the medium and the others were on the hard, they were all about even again on average pace. So, I mean, you don't know exactly like what modes they're running in and what exact fuel they're running. So you're sort of clutching a little bit, but it's interesting to see that is potentially already like a factor to look out for, I guess. Like those races where there might be a huge stint on those hard tyres, might be ones to look at McLaren for, potentially.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of caveats to this, but definitely within McLaren, the ones to beat as things currently stand. Behind them, Ferrari and Mercedes look pretty closely matched. I think Ferrari may be slightly faster of the two, but the Mercedes maybe looks a little more stable, a bit easier to drive. Certainly saw less kind of moments from Mercedes, I think, which maybe points to them potentially being better on tyres over a race distance.
So
but pretty close between the two.
Isn't it? Ferrari always have a bit of a tyre life balance that they have to find.
Yeah. I mean, Mercedes basically had as perfect a test as you could want. I don't think they had a single issue that stopped any of the running. They did the most laps of anyone.
Yeah, I was about to say they were one of the highest in laps, weren't they? They were in that top group.
458 over the 3 days, which was one more than Haas and a handful more than the Racing Bulls. They seem pretty happy. Certainly seem a lot happier than Mercedes have at this point in the last 2 or 3 years. Ferrari, a few more niggling issues. I don't think Hamilton managed a full race sim at any point. He was doing one on the last day, but they had some kind of sensor issue, so he had to stop partway through that. But Again, Hamilton generally seems a lot happier than he has the last couple of years as well. This Ferrari seems to be suiting the way he wants to drive a car.
We'll just have to see how long that is a honeymoon phase for, I guess.
Yeah.
Is it just the naivety of stepping into that team and just that honeymoon period, or is it genuinely going to be something he feels like he can compete with? So that'd be interesting to see once we actually hit the track
driving in anger
in a week or so's time.
Yeah. And then sort of completing the top four, Red Bull sort of look like they're behind Ferrari and Mercedes at the moment, but they're a bit of a mystery at the moment, Red Bull. Like, they did the least laps of any team. They only did 304 compared to like 458 for Mercedes. Not so much. There was a couple of sort of longer periods in the garage where that seems to be fixing things, but they seem to mostly just be doing a lot of swapping parts, changing setups. Like even on the final afternoon, Verstappen was like running 3 or 4 different setups across that afternoon trying to pin it down. So it seems like from the outside they're maybe struggling to get the most out of that car at the moment.
Yeah, with teams like this, it's a bit like the classic Mercedes sandbagging when Mercedes were a dominant team at one point. Like, the Red Bull looked so similar to last year's initially, and Horner's been almost going out of his way to, in any kind of interviews and comms with anyone, pointing out how the car is what it is, and this is what we were taking to Australia. But I wouldn't be surprised if some immediate modifications were spotted by the sort of eagle-eyed people in the paddock, like your Ted Kravitzes and people like that, who are always on it and like, oh look, the Red Bull has this new air intake, or it has this new like little fin somewhere. Like he will spot stuff like that immediately. Yeah. So it would be interesting to see if the car does change at all.
There's some speculation around Red Bull. So I think Williams, Alpine, and possibly Haas have all said that they are basically reusing the tub, the monocoque from last season, or at least like a slightly modified version of it. And people are speculating that Red Bull are maybe doing the same. They've been kind of coy about answering that question, but
yeah, I
mean, looking at the two cars side by side, as much as they are sort of saying, "Oh, it's every party's different," it's not a revolution, that car. It's
no, but it's similar to the McLaren scenario, right? Like,
yeah, true.
If you look at the two McLarens side by side, the 38 and the 39, you would be forgiven for thinking they were the same. It's when you start digging into them from a little bit more of a technical aspect, and I think it's mainly like when you start looking at it head on. I've seen a few technical drawings of the two kind of half and half, the MCL 38 and the MCL 39, and you can see where a lot of work on the McLaren has gone into reprofiling the air intake on the main airbox. There's reprofiling gone to the air intakes on the side pods. There's some little changes down the side of the nose. Like, they're small, but they're potentially significant. And I think that I haven't seen anything like that for the Red Bull yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if something like that was doable and you could start seeing these sort of minute changes. But I think we're in a situation where we have one last season of these regulations. You've got cars that were doing pretty well in these regulations and just needed others to catch up realistically. And then you've also got the fact that Red Bull had previously been hamstrung by restricted aero time and so on. So are they realistically focusing more on future developments and just doing what they can to get by and make sure the car's competitive for this season, but not trying to make a grid-destroying car and be just dominant champions? And I think that from what we've seen of it, I think that they'll probably be playing a role similar to Ferrari when we had that McLaren Red Bull fight. I can honestly see that you probably get a McLaren Ferrari fight this year with Mercedes and Red Bull sort of trying to fight over the scraps of third best constructor is my guess, I think. But
that's kind of how I feel as well, yeah. Plus you can argue over the influence of one person, but Adrian Newey aside, like Red Bull have had a lot of personnel changes in the last year or two, so they are in a bit of a transition period as well, which is likely going to affect things.
Yeah, which is yet another thing that Horner's tried to play down, like when it's been brought up, saying, our turnover is not any more significant than any other team, and yada yada yada. But at the end of the day, it's not just any personnel that's leaving; it's key personnel. I've forgotten the guy's name now, but one of the head mechanics is also leaving, isn't he? Already left.
Callum.
Yes.
Something or other.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, even people like that that have been part of that team for a long time are now choosing to move on. It becomes like a bit of a changing of the guard, and you have to have the people ready to come into that void and be as good at that role as anybody else that they're replacing. So. It'd be an interesting season for Red Bull, I think, but with the prospect of Ford and everything like that, I don't think it'll be. It's not like it's going to be a huge disaster or anything, and they'll be competitive. I just don't think that their sole focus is being a grid destroyer car this year.
Yeah, I think we'd be foolish to write them off, but they're certainly going to be. Yeah, not what they started last year, as it looks like. Moving into the midfield, this is where there does seem to be a bit of a change, because I think this kind of best of the rest fifth place seems to be probably the two teams that had the worst time at this point last year, which is Alpine and Williams, both looking decent. Carlos Sainz had the fastest lap of all across the 3 days of testing. Take that with a massive pinch of salt. They're definitely not going to be the fastest car come qualifying on in a couple of weekends' time. But definitely hugely improved. Williams came away from that test looking very happy, like good number of laps, good lap times, genuinely seemed to be at the head of the midfield. And likewise for Alpine, think where Alpine were this time last year. Yeah,
it was awful, wasn't it? So overweight as a car and
abysmal.
All those problems, it was just So for them to be where they are now is a lot better.
Really seems to have turned things around. As things currently stand, it looks like it's going to be sort of them two kind of fighting for those last few places in Q3, bottom end of the points kind of positions. Interesting. I hope that pans out, because it would be nice to see both those teams having a better time of it. Williams have sort of said that they didn't really care about the results until the new regs in 2026, but it kind of seems to be coming a bit quicker for them, which is cool.
Yeah.
Behind them, it gets a little muddier and hard to sort of pick apart. Probably Haas and Aston Martin are the next kind of group behind them. Haas didn't really do much qualifying running, so it's hard to tell exactly where their pace is. They mostly seem to concentrate on long run pace. They did have an enormous piece of bodywork fall off twice, once at their shakedown in Silverstone, then again during the test, which wasn't great.
This is not a wheel, I guess. It's normally wheels when it's
could be worse. Could be a lot worse. It is worth saying that this time last year, Haas looked like they were having a tough time in testing as well, and then went on to have a much better year than anyone expected. So, they may be a bit close to Alpine and Williams than it looks, but they're kind of there or thereabouts. Aston, kind of comparative to the rest of the field, seem to have gone backwards again. They say they've made loads of changes to the car from last year, but none of it seems to be doing much, really, does it?
No, it's a difficult one, this one as well, because they're in that situation where New is kind of officially there now, but he's not going to be able to have any kind of immediate impact on that car.
No.
If anything, he'll just be focused on the next cars.
I think Aston are very quickly going to write this year off, to be honest.
Yeah, the way that they looked in testing felt like that could be the case. Although, I mean, there's moments where I sort of look at the times and I kind of think, well, or at least from what I saw of it anyway, it feels like Alonso had a much better time during testing, and the times that he was putting up looked more favourable for the car compared to what Stroll was doing. Although, to be fair, I mean, Lance Stroll got the glory run, didn't he, for Aston? I think the fastest Aston time overall was Stroll's, so... But I guess that's all circumstantial as well.
Yeah.
If Alonso's not gone on a low fuel quali run, then he's not going to get the fastest time.
Stroll didn't actually do that much running either. He was ill for quite a lot of the tests, so Alonso ended up doing the bulk of the testing, which I'm sure he was thrilled about. There's been another setback for Aston in the last few days as well. Enrico Cardile, who left Ferrari to be Aston Martin's new chief technical officer.
Yes.
There's been a dispute over his start date, which Ferrari have won that, which means he now will be stuck on gardening leave until July 18th this year. They were hoping to get him a lot sooner than that. So, yeah, another bit of a setback there for them. But, yeah, as we said, the team very much looking at next year, I think, in the new regs.
Yeah, definitely.
And then finally at the back, Racing Bulls and Sauber, both. I mean, there's not much to say about them other than they just both looked slow. Sauber very clearly looking like the last place team at the moment. They had just a pretty torrid time of it, really. Just looked slow and stiff, and yeah, it's going to be a rough year for Hulkenberg, I think. A lot banking on their change to Audi next year. As far as they're concerned.
Yeah, a little bit of a shame for the Racing Bulls as well, just based on the fact that, you know, they were coming from as much of the car as possible being bought in from above at Red Bull. Not that dissimilar a car, I don't think, overall, but obviously, you know, it clearly has its own concept and its own way of doing things. But yeah, I'm a little disheartened that what is one of the better looking cars on the grid is going to spend most of his time at the back from testing standpoint, anyway. It
is interesting that they are so much more closely aligned with Red Bull now, as you say, taking way more parts from them. And I was primed for there to be loads of other teams complaining after this test when they turned out to be one of the quicker cars in the midfield, and they're just not. Like, that closer connection is just not doing the job for them for whatever reason.
Yeah.
I guess it's similar to Haas and Ferrari. Like, when Haas are doing well, people start complaining about all the Ferrari bits they buy, and then when they're not doing so well, it all goes very quiet again.
Yeah.
I think I'm right saying Williams are taking a lot more... Well, Williams take parts from Mercedes, but they're taking more up-to-date parts this year as well, so it's clearly working for them.
I mean, we talked about it a little bit a couple of weeks ago during the launch event, the F175 event, the fact that Mercedes had changed over the gearbox units to a new format, which meant it was the establishment between that and the rear suspension wasn't what it used to be, and it meant that Williams just didn't have time to do what they needed to do to make that work to the best of its ability, and they've now hopefully got on top of that, which is possibly one of the reasons that Williams has been able to kind of leapfrog a few people they have.
They were basically using year-old Mercedes rear suspension last season, whereas now they've got the up-to-date same setup that the current Mercedes has. So and that's kind of about where we are post-testing. I mean, we can look at the fastest laps, but it doesn't it doesn't mean all that much, does it really? I mean, as we say, Carlos Sainz had the fastest lap of all. I doubt Williams are going to be putting it on pole.
Imagine if they do.
I'd be here for it.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, looking at the times going in over testing, it was like Carlos Sainz had forgotten he wasn't in a Ferrari anymore. Like,
yeah,
he seems very happy in that car at the very least. There's a couple of newsy bits worth looking at before we wrap up for the end of testing. A couple of rule changes going into the new season. Most notably, a rule change has been mooted for a little while now for the Monaco Grand Prix, which as of this season is going to be a mandatory 2-stop race. So, as we all know, the existing rule says that unless the wet or intermediates used, every car has to use 2 compounds of dry weather tyre during the race, which is kind of a way of mandating a single pit stop. The new rule specific for Monaco, so there's 2 changes, both of which are really significant actually. The first is that 3 sets of tyres must be used of at least 2 different compounds unless wet or intermediates are used, so you have to make at least 2 pit stops. Well, not strictly true, because it doesn't do anything about the red flag rule. So technically, if there was a red flag, cars could swap tyres during that to avoid making a second pit stop. But unless there's 2 red flags, there's going to be at least 1 pit stop. The other interesting change is that, unlike every other race, the minimum tyre sets used still applies even if wets or intermediates are used. So even if it's a wet race in Monaco, it will still be a 2-stop race. You still have to use 3 compounds, even if they're wets and intermediates. So obviously this is to kind of try to improve the show at what has been, at least in recent years, a pretty dull race. What do we think of this as a change, as an approach?
I think in reality, the only way this is going to make the difference that they want it to is if you end up with situations like, I don't know, the year Ricciardo got called in badly and it cost him the race, the year that it happened to Leclerc, the year that Bottas got a wheel nut stuck and it ended his race. Like, you're relying on the jeopardy side of a pit stop. I don't think forcing 2 pit stops to make like strategy part of it is going to have the effect that they want it to. I think it will only have a proper effect if there's a jeopardy element, like something goes wrong with the stops, which just diminishes the result even further in a way, because it's part of racing, but for them to kind of force every car to have at least 2 stops, and then, like, let's say that second stop is something that costs somebody a race win, you know, the rule has taken that away from someone, technically speaking. I'm not sure how I feel about it, let's put it that way.
It does, I mean, because technically we already do have different rules for Monaco versus other races, because the length of the track and the distance of the race is different. So it's not unheard of, but this, I don't know, I'm very on the fence about it. I'm interested to see how it pans out. I'm happy to let it run. I'm not gonna like boycott the whole thing because they're making this change, but I just personally don't see what it will add and what it will improve. I don't see how it will improve things, because I mean, have they actually said this is to improve the quality of the race as a product? Or have they just said, we're doing this year, that's it? I'm not sure if the actual wording of like the press release mentioned that. I'm sure it said something like that. I just don't see how it does that. Thing is, last year's race with the early red flag proved that you can basically do an entire race distance at Monaco on a set of hard tyres, because pretty much everybody did it. They all changed their tyres in the pit lane, and then just went to the end. If I was a Sauber, a Racing Bulls of this world, let's say, and you're qualified on the back row, why not start on a set of hard tyres, pit at the end of lap 1 and stick some mediums on, pit at the end of lap 2 and put the hards back on, and then just wait for a safety car or a red flag?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, you don't even have to go that far, though. Here's what you do. Start on the medium or the soft, whichever you want. Pit at the end of lap 1 to put the hards on. And then just run the race until the end, basically.
Yeah.
And if a red flag or a safety car comes, you take advantage of that and put another set of mediums or hards on, whatever's better, depending on how long's left. If it doesn't, you just keep eking it out and eking it out and eking it out. And when you get to like the last 2 or 3 laps and that's not coming, you just drop in and get another set of softs or something like that. Like,
at least one team is going to try some shenanigans like that, I'm sure.
I'd have thought so. Like, get a set off straight away so that you've done it, especially if you're starting at the back. Just get a lap round, get a set off, get hards on, run and jump anyone that you can as they pit, and just go as far into that race as you can and hope there's a red flag or a safety car that gets you back out. And I mean, that's where the change, I guess, will reward somebody. But again, it's just exploiting the rules that are there, I guess. Like, it doesn't feel like proper racing, that. It just feels like just being opportunistic, I guess.
Yeah. And I think
everyone benefits from safety cars and red flags at some time or another.
Yeah, exactly. That's just part of the game. And I think for the teams at the front, I think ultimately they're just going to, as is usually the case, they're just going to mirror each other to cover each other off. And all we're really adding is kind of, as you said before, it's just adding another opportunity for something to go wrong for someone. That's all it's really adding. And as Paul's just said in the chat, like, it's not going to make a difference because cars still can't overtake there.
Yeah,
that's the biggest issue Monaco has. It's strategy is not the problem at Monaco. It's the fact that the cars are just too big and heavy for a track like that. So yeah, I'm interested to see if it does make a difference, but I'm not expecting it to.
I don't expect it to. No,
not. One more rule change has been announced for the coming season, which is increased powers for race control to stop damaged cars driving around and shedding bits everywhere. They haven't said directly as much, but it very much feels like a response to Canada last year, where Perez carried on driving around, dropping bits because Red Bull wanted to try to avoid causing a safety car, which would have harmed Verstappen's race. So the new wording basically says any car that has significant and obvious damage to a structural component, which results in it being in a condition presenting an immediate risk or endangering the driver or others, which means it cannot reasonably return to the pit lane without unnecessarily impeding another competitor or otherwise hindering the competition, must leave the track as soon as it's safe to do so. And then it also adds that at the sole discretion of the race director, should a car be deemed to have such significant damage, the competitor may be instructed that the car must leave the track as soon as it's safe to do so. So basically, it's on the drivers to get off the track if they can't make it back around to the pit safely, and if they're not doing that, the race director can tell them to, which I think makes complete sense. It does also open the question of, is the race director going to be able to tell the driver that directly? Because we spoke a lot last year about lines of communication and whether race directors should be able to message drivers directly.
I mean, I can tell you right now what's going to happen the first time this comes about, if it comes about this year. Someone's going to have an incident and have, I don't know, a rear wing hanging off and shedding carbon fibre everywhere, akin to the Perez situation. They're going to be spending their time trundling that round to try and get it back in the garage, even though it's not realistically salvageable, but they're going to do it anyway. If the race director cannot do something that essentially immediately tells that driver, stop at the next marshal's point, or else, what's going to happen is they're going to message the team. The team are going to then probably push back and argue to buy time, and then the race director's going to say, no, do it, and they're going to say, yeah, but he's nearly back round, blah, 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 and it's going to go back and forth, and by the time that's happened, and they then go to the driver and go, okay, and they go to the driver and say, you need to stop the car at the next possible point, they're going to be basically back at the pits anyway. Unless it literally happens into turn 1, or early in sector 1. If it happens from halfway around the track onwards, there's going to be back and forth from the team if that's the way it's going to work. Because who wouldn't in that scenario? Any team would. In order to try, especially 100%. Especially if they're in a scenario some of the teams aren't going to care. Your Haas's and people like that who are down the back anyway, potentially, aren't really going to care because it's not going to directly impact the other drivers' race that much. But your teams like your Red Bulls, your Ferraris, Mercedes, McLaren, they've all got a vested interest in either doing something that will mean that there's definitely a safety car or trying to avoid a safety car, depending on what situation the other car's in. And I can just see that it getting a bit messy. It's just yet another call, though, and yet another reason, like what we've said in the past, to have Formula E and other series style direct-to-driver comms from race control of this is happening. And, you see it in all sorts. You see it in IndyCar, you see it in NASCAR, I think, now, Formula E, all these sort of top of their sector sports have that direct line of comms to basically say, this is what is happening, this is what we expect of you, and this is what is happening next. And it works for all those series, generally speaking.
Yeah, totally.
So,
yeah. I mean, if only we just had 3 days of testing where they could have tested out a system like that, but there we go. And that's about all that's going on at this point in time. But the new season is rapidly approaching. So we'll be back next week to do our first race preview of the new season ahead of the Australian Grand Prix, which feels so right to say.
It does feel better.
Season starting in Australia.
It does feel better.
In the meantime, if you want a bit of a racing fix, we've had the opening rounds of WEC and IndyCar over the past couple of weekends, both of which are races worth, at the very least, checking out the highlights for.
Yeah, no spoilers, but both very good races.
Yes. We also have the Race of Champions this weekend, which is in Sydney, Australia, featuring names like Valtteri Bottas, Sebastian Vettel, Mick Schumacher, Heikki Kovalainen, David Coulthard, among lots of rally drivers that will probably beat them because it's normally rally drivers that tend to win that thing. But if you've not watched Race Champions before, it's normally quite good fun. It's like drivers from different disciplines driving a sort of range of cars on a short track inside a stadium. It's quite good fun, so I can recommend that. If you want to talk to us in the meantime, backofthegrid.com, where you can contact us there. You can get yourself pre-signed up for the Predictions League for next season if you've not done that already as well. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all of those things. If you want to join our Discord community, where we have kind of live chats along with the races and stuff, you can go to patreon.com/backofthegrid to find out how to do that. But I think that is everything for now. So thanks as always for joining us. We'll see you next week to properly kick the season off. But until then, goodbye.
Bye, everyone.